A single dad, a girl in a red dress, and a rainstorm that changed everything.
There's a particular kind of rain in Tennessee in late October, heavy and relentless, arriving all at once like a decision already made. It clears the streets fast. It empties parking lots faster. It was that kind of rain the night Caleb Rutherford forgot eggs. He'd already driven halfway home from his 10-hour shift when he remembered. His daughter Wren had asked for scrambled eggs that morning, her favorite on a Thursday, and he had a personal rule about not disappointing her when he could help it. So he turned the truck around, drove back to Greenfield Grocery on Alderman Road, and was inside for less than 4 minutes. He was pushing through the exit doors, paper bag under his arm, when he saw her. A young woman, alone, in a wheelchair, just past the awning's edge, completely in the rain. Soaked red dress, hair flat against her face, one hand pressed to her collarbone like she was physically holding herself together. Not crying, not calling out, not looking up, just sitting there, still as something abandoned, staring at the wet pavement with the hollow, used-up look of someone who had already spent everything they had. He stopped walking, he set his bag down, and he walked over. What he could not have known in that moment, what neither of them could have known, was that this one quiet choice, made in a rain-soaked parking lot on an ordinary Thursday night, was about to unlock a truth buried for over 2 decades, hidden behind closed doors, unsent letters, and a silence so long it had grown roots. And it was about to find her. Stay with us. This story is only just beginning. If you love heartwarming stories that stay with you long after they end, subscribe to Everhart Tales right now and hit that bell. Now, back to Caleb and Laurel. This is where everything begins.
Clover Ridge, Tennessee, Thursday evening, the 23rd of October, 7:14 p.m. Greenfield Grocery sat at the far end of Alderman Road. Well lit, open until 9, the kind of place that served as an unofficial neighborhood landmark. On a dry evening, there would have been families in the lot, teenagers near the entrance, the slow, unhurried rhythm of a small-town Thursday. Tonight, the rain had cleared all of it. The lot was nearly empty. The strip lights buzzed softly above wet asphalt. Caleb Rutherford was 34, broad-shouldered, with the quiet, unhurried way of moving that comes from years of not having anyone to rush for. He worked facilities management at Crestwood Medical Center. Long shifts, early mornings, the kind of work that goes invisible when done right. He'd been doing it 6 years, and he was good at it. He pulled his collar up and moved toward his truck, a dark blue F-150 he'd had since before Wren was born, when something made him slow. Not a sound, not a movement, just a presence at the edge of his awareness, pulling at something quiet in him. Just past the awning's edge, where the shelter ended and the rain began, a young woman sat in a wheelchair, a heavy bag loaded onto the seat beside her, the only thing she had left to her name. Early 20s, red bodycon dress, soaked completely through, hair plastered flat against her face, a compression bandage wrapped around her left ankle. One hand rested on the armrest, the other pressed flat to her collarbone, bracing against something internal, something that had nothing to do with the rain. She wasn't making a scene, wasn't asking for anything. Eyes fixed on the pavement, face holding the expression that takes real practice to maintain. Blank, controlled, entirely still. The practiced stillness of someone who has decided that if they can just hold on long enough, they will get through this. Caleb watched her a moment longer than he needed to. Then he set his bag down and stepped out into the rain.
Hey. Easy, unhurried, like a man with no agenda and all the time in the world. She looked up slowly. Gray-green eyes, like river water on a cold morning, exhausted in a way that was almost painful to look at directly. She studied him the way you study a stranger you're not yet sure about. I'm fine. Barely above a whisper. You're sitting in the rain, in a dress, alone. That's not usually what fine looks like. Something moved across her face, reluctant, almost involuntary. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of one. I don't have anywhere to go right now. No performance, no self-pity, just the plain, tired fact of it, delivered with what was left of her dignity, which even now was more than most would have had. Caleb didn't flinch. He nodded once, slowly, The way you nod when something fits into the logic of the world and you can work with it. Come inside. Let's get you warm first. We'll figure the rest out from there. You really don't have to. I know. Simple. Already decided. He stepped behind the wheelchair, released the wheels, and pushed her through the entrance doors, as naturally as if he did this kind of thing every Thursday. The deli counter stayed open until 8. Caleb bought her a hot coffee, cream, 2 sugars, a guess that turned out to be right, and a turkey and Swiss on wheat. He set them at one of the small tables near the back and took the chair across without hovering. He didn't push her to talk. He simply sat, with his own black coffee, looking entirely comfortable, like a man who understood the value of letting things arrive in their own time. And slowly, they did. She told it the way you tell hard things to a stranger, in pieces, testing each one before handing over the next, watching his face for the look that meant she'd said too much. That look never came. Her name was Laurel Deanne Whitfield, 22 years old. Her parents divorced when she was 7. No drama, just 2 people who had gradually and quietly become strangers to each other. Her mother, Sandra, moved to a small apartment on the east side of town. Her father, Dale, kept the house. Laurel split her time between them and barely thought of it as unusual. Sandra was the kind of mother who occasionally forgot to sign school forms but never once missed their nightly phone call. She was warm and a little scattered, with a gift for making wherever she was feel like the most interesting place in the world to be. But there was one door she never opened. Laurel had asked about her mother's family exactly 3 times. Each time, Sandra's face did something careful, a composed smile that never reached her eyes, and she would say, gently but finally, "Some doors are best left closed, sweetheart." Laurel learned not to push it. When Laurel was 11, Sandra was diagnosed with a degenerative liver condition. She protected her daughter from the full truth of it for as long as she could, with the fierce, exhausting love of a mother who cannot accept she is leaving. She passed away a few weeks before Laurel's 13th birthday, on a Tuesday morning in March, with the curtains open and the pale early spring light coming through the window. At the graveside, Dale reached for her hand and squeezed 3 times, their signal, the one they had since she was small. "I love you." She squeezed back 4, "I love you more." He smiled above his grief in the way that only fathers of daughters can. After that, it was just the 2 of them. Dale Whitfield was not a complicated man. Steady construction foreman, steady, practical, reliable in the bone-deep way that things built to last are reliable. His particular form of love was presence. He showed up for every school event, every bad report card, every 2 a.m. nightmare. He learned to pack the lunches Sandra had always made. He learned to braid Laurel's hair, badly at first, then with slow, patient improvement she found more moving than any natural talent could have been. He never made her feel like an obligation. He made her feel like the reason. For 5 years, it was just the 2 of them, and it was enough. Then, when she was 16, Dale began seeing Carla Benson, composed and precisely spoken, with 2 grown sons and a quality of controlled self-possession that Laurel could never quite find a way through. Not unkind, not obvious about anything, simply present in the way that things that don't entirely belong in a space can still fully occupy it. Laurel kept her feelings to herself. Dale was happy. He deserved that. She smiled at the right moments, and when they married, on a Saturday in June, she meant every smile she gave him. She had not known then what was coming. 8 weeks ago, Dale collapsed at a job site. Cardiac arrest, sudden and severe. Laurel drove 3 hours with her hands tight on the wheel and the radio off, and arrived at Henderson County General to find him in the ICU. 4 days in the waiting room, vending machine coffee and quiet, desperate prayer. The doctors were cautiously hopeful by day 4. Stable, improving. On the 5th morning, she walked down the hall to use the restroom. 6 minutes, maybe 7. When she came back, a nurse was moving toward her with that particular walk, measured, careful, the one you learn somewhere between training and your first hard year on the floor. Laurel knew before a word was spoken. She hadn't made it in time. She stood in that corridor for a long while, long enough that a second nurse came to ask if she needed to sit. She didn't answer. She wasn't entirely sure where she was. 10 days after the burial, Carla set a document on the table. Dale's will, the house and estate left entirely to Carla, a modest trust for Laurel locked until she turned 25. Carla delivered it gently, with the careful, measured kindness of someone who has rehearsed what they're going to say.
That gentleness, the deliberateness of it, had been the hardest part. "You have 30 days to make other arrangements," Carla said. Laurel spent those 30 days calling friends and receiving careful, apologetic explanations about why it wasn't possible right now. She looked at apartments she couldn't afford. She made lists and crossed things off. She kept moving because stopping felt like something she couldn't survive. On the final night, she came home late and found a locksmith's van out front. Her boxes on the porch. The locks already changed. Carla had moved the date up without telling her. She stood and looked at the boxes. Her ankle throbbed from where she'd twisted it 2 nights before on these very steps. Her bag was too heavy to carry any real distance. The last bus would stop running in 40 minutes. And then she thought of the wheelchair. Her father's wheelchair from his final weeks when the stairs had become impossible, still folded in the front hall closet, one of the very few things Carla hadn't touched. She loaded her bag onto the seat, made it to the bus stop with 3 minutes to spare, rode to the nearest warm open place she could think of, Greenfield Grocery on Alderman Road. That had been 4 hours ago. The last bus came and went. Her phone hit 0. Then the rain started. She was wearing the red dress because, even tonight, even on the worst night of her life, some quiet, stubborn part of her had refused to look the way she felt.
Caleb listened to every word without hurrying her, without offering the hollow reassurances people reach for when the truth is too heavy to sit with. When she finished, the rain was still steady outside. 4 hours. Just that, letting the weight of it find somewhere to land. She nodded, looking at her hands, the small, pained embarrassment of someone who has handed too much of themselves to a stranger and only just realized it. "You've got nothing to be embarrassed about. Not one thing." She looked up. Something in her eyes shifted. Not quite relief, but the thing that lives just next to it. Caleb plugged her phone into the charging station near the customer service desk. A small, practical thing, but she exhaled quietly when he did it, and he noticed. Then he stepped away and made a phone call. His mother answered on the second ring. Loretta Rutherford was a woman of a particular generation and temperament, the kind who did not need extended discussion to know what was right. Caleb explained in 4 sentences. "You bring that girl here right now, Caleb." Not a question, a statement of what was going to happen. He walked Laurel to his truck, lifted her bag from the seat of the wheelchair and set it in the bed, then folded the chair in after it. He helped her into the passenger seat and had the heat on high before he'd even started the engine. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched the rain streak the window. The rigid, held-together quality had quietly left her shoulders without her seeming to notice.
Sycamore Lane was 12 minutes away. The yellow house at the end of the block was lit warmly from within, porch light burning the way it always did. Loretta was 63, 5'2", and moved with the efficient purpose of someone who has always known what she was doing and seen no reason to slow down about it. She was at the door before Caleb finished parking. She looked at Laurel, soaked, pale, held together with the very last of something, and didn't say a word. She simply opened her arms. Laurel hesitated, just a breath, the instinctive hesitation of someone braced so long that warmth feels like something that might not hold. Then she stepped into it. Loretta held on, a moment longer than politeness requires, long enough to mean something. Inside, she placed Laurel by the heat vent, deliberately where the warm air rose strongest, and draped a thick blanket over her shoulders. She brought dry clothes from the closet, soft, unremarkable things that fit as though chosen. She didn't ask her to explain herself, or justify being there, or produce any of the small demonstrations of gratitude that drain you when you have nothing left to spend. She simply moved around her with the quiet, capable warmth of someone who had decided, without announcement, that this was family now. Laurel sat still and let herself be taken care of. It had been a very long time. Caleb was in the kitchen when the voice came from the stairs. "Dad, who's here?" Wren asked. 8 years old, star-print pajamas, standing at the top of the stairs with the calm authority of a child who has decided the household is partly her jurisdiction. "A friend. Come say hello and then back to bed." Wren descended with considerable dignity, studied Laurel with large, serious brown eyes, and conducted several silent assessments. "Are you staying over?" "Just a couple of nights, maybe," Laurel said. "You can have the blanket with the stars on it. It's the warmest one." She turned, climbed back up the stairs with the same deliberate dignity, and disappeared down the hall. Loretta appeared in the kitchen doorway, dish towel over her shoulder. That's the good blanket. She doesn't share that with just anyone. You've been approved." And Laurel laughed. Small and slightly startled, the involuntary kind that escapes when the day has been so heavy that something small and gentle breaks through before you can stop it. Unsteady at the edges, but entirely real. She pressed her fingers to her lips, almost surprised by the sound of it. Loretta just smiled, the smile of someone who has seen enough hard seasons to know exactly what a first laugh sounds like and what it means. Later, after the tea and soup, after the small back room with its window above the garden and the promised blanket folded at the foot of the bed, Laurel sat on the edge of the mattress in borrowed dry clothes and looked around her. Small, quiet, cedar and clean laundry and the rain softening against the glass. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt safe enough to stop. She lay down, pulled the blanket around her, and for the first time in 8 weeks, she slept all the way through without dreaming. A couple of nights became a week. Nobody announced the shift. It simply happened the way right things sometimes do, without requiring a formal decision. Loretta cleared a drawer and put fresh towels in the bathroom and said nothing more about it. Caleb told Laurel to take the time she needed. He believed him because nothing in the way he said it gave her any reason not to. Within the first week, Loretta quietly insisted she stay off the ankle as much as possible. She wrapped it each morning without making a fuss about it, efficiently and without ceremony, the way she did everything. By the end of the second week, the swelling had gone down. By the end of the third, Laurel was walking to the bus stop without a second thought. The wheelchair went back into the closet, folded neatly, the way her father had always kept it, and she left it there, not with sadness, with something closer to gratitude. She re-enrolled at Carver Community College in early November. Her interior design advisor, Dr. Ferris, had held her place without fanfare. Laurel sat at the drafting table in her first studio class and felt something in her chest she recognized distantly as purpose. The specific grounding sense of knowing what your hands are for.
She found part-time work at Sage and Stem, a home decor shop 2 bus stops away. The owner, Paula, looked at Laurel's sketchbook during the interview for roughly 45 seconds before saying she was hired. Laurel started paying Loretta from her first paycheck. Loretta accepted with a nod, a quiet, "Thank you, honey," and never raised the subject again. What Laurel wouldn't discover until much later was that Loretta had opened a separate savings account and was depositing every cent, untouched. In the evenings, she sketched at the kitchen table. Floor plans, color studies, furniture arrangements for rooms that existed only on paper. The slow, absorbing work she'd let go quiet during the weeks of grief and displacement. Those evenings had a particular quality she would always remember. The low light, the murmur of the television from the other room, Wren doing homework across from her, occasionally asking Laurel to explain things she'd already understood simply because she enjoyed the explanation. Some evenings Laurel had to look down at her sketchbook so no one would see her face. Caleb didn't hover, didn't try to fix or steer anything. He simply appeared, at the breakfast table in the mornings, on the porch in the evenings, and made sure, in the unhurried, unshowy way that was entirely his own, that she didn't feel invisible. They started with small things, then, gradually, the bigger ones. He told her about Claire one Friday evening in mid-November, the porch cold enough they both held their mugs with both hands. How she'd been a kindergarten teacher, how she laughed too loudly at her own jokes, how she made extraordinary breakfast burritos and refused, on principle, to name the secret ingredient. How some mornings he still reached for his phone to send her something funny, and the remembering still landed as a small, clean shock, even 2 years on. It doesn't stop changing you. I want to be honest about that. But the shape of the change gets less sharp. You stop being afraid of it. And one morning you realize you've built something real around the absence, something that's yours. How long did that actually take? Not the version you tell people, the real one. He considered it honestly. Longer than anyone told me it would. Shorter than I was afraid it might be. She filed that somewhere careful and useful.
Wren had decided within the first week that Laurel was permanent and welcome and saw no reason to revisit the question. One evening, she climbed onto the kitchen stool beside Laurel and watched the pencil move in silence for a while. "What are you drawing?" Wren asked. "A living room for a made-up family," Laurel said. "What kind of family?" Laurel looked at the drawing, then at Wren. "A good one." Wren picked up a spare pencil and added a small dog in the corner of the room. Laurel looked at it a moment, then added the dog's water bowl. Wren nodded once, the air of something settled, and went back to her homework. 4 months passed, quietly, warmly, the way healing moves when you stop fighting it and give it the room it needs. Wednesday morning, the 26th of November, 9:43 a.m. The kind of late autumn morning where the light is low and colorless, the trees entirely bare, everything outside stripped to its honest essentials. Wren was at school, Caleb at work. From the back of the house came the soft rhythmic sound of Loretta folding laundry, and beneath it, low and tuneless, her humming, the sound she made when she was entirely comfortable. Laurel was at the kitchen table with her second coffee and her sketchbook open to window treatment studies. One leg tucked beneath her, pencil moving slowly, the kind of settled, quiet comfort she had almost forgotten the feeling of. She glanced up at the window out of habit, the idle, unfocused glance you give when your mind is elsewhere, and she stopped.
A black car was moving slowly down Sycamore Lane, the deliberate way a car moves when the driver is looking for a specific address. It stopped at the curb directly in front of Loretta's yellow house. Laurel set her pencil down. The engine cut. A beat of stillness. Then, not the driver's door, the rear door opened. A woman stepped out. Mid-70s, silver hair pinned precisely at the nape of her neck, a long charcoal wool coat, beautifully cut, leather gloves. She stood on the sidewalk and looked at the house with the composed, unhurried attention of someone who has traveled far to get somewhere and intends to be certain before she acts. Laurel had never seen this woman before in her life. She was sure of that. She had always been good with faces, and this face was not anywhere in her memory. And yet, something in the set of the jaw, the particular quality of stillness, the way she stood with her weight slightly forward, as if always oriented toward whatever she was moving toward. It sent a current through Laurel's chest she couldn't name, something that felt, without any rational basis, like recognition. 3 knocks, firm and measured. Loretta came from the back of the house and opened the door. The woman looked past her, directly, with the total focus of someone who knows precisely who they are looking for, and found Laurel across the room. Their eyes met. The woman's expression was controlled and precise on the surface, but underneath all of that careful arrangement, something was broken, completely open. Laurel could see it as clearly as if she'd said it aloud, the way you see something in a person's face when it is simply too large to contain. The woman said one word, Laurel. Not a question, the way you say a name you have been saying quietly to yourself for a very long time, and have finally, after everything, allowed yourself to say out loud. Laurel rose slowly from her chair. I'm sorry, do I know you? The woman stepped inside. Loretta, with the instinctive wisdom she had in matters like this, moved one quiet step aside. The woman looked at Laurel the way you look at the answer to a question you were not sure you would ever find, and have been looking for you for a very long time. Loretta put the kettle on without being asked, set 3 cups on the table, and made herself present in the quiet, capable way she had, close enough to offer comfort, unobtrusive enough to let what needed to happen, happen. Eleanor sat across from Laurel. She removed her gloves, folded them precisely, placed them beside her. Then, with the directness of someone who has decided that softening the truth would be its own kind of disrespect, she began. She and Franklin had met at 22 and married at 24. Over 4 decades, they built a manufacturing company together. Precision components, long-term contracts, the kind of enterprise that takes everything you have. It became more than a business. The Voss name meant something in Asheville: reliability, continuity. They had 1 child, Sandra, born in 1967. Sandra grew up in a world where her future had already been quietly given a shape. She would carry the company forward one day. Eleanor had never framed it as a choice, simply as the way things were going to be. She had believed, genuinely, that she was giving her daughter something valuable. She had been wrong. When Sandra was 24, she met a man named Dale Whitfield at a building site where Franklin was overseeing an inspection. He was the foreman's assistant, capable, straightforward, no connection to anything the Voss family had built. Sandra came home that evening with something in her face that Eleanor recognized immediately and was afraid of from that very first moment. Within 6 months, Sandra wanted out of the company, out of Asheville, out of the future arranged around her without her consent. Eleanor issued an ultimatum: the family or the man. She said this without flinching, without the careful reframing people use when they need their worst moments to sound like something other than what they were. She had been certain Sandra would choose the family. Sandra packed a bag that night, left a 3-line note, did not call, did not write, severed the connection completely, and never reached back, not once, not in all the years that followed. Eleanor waited. Then she told herself she'd reach out when the pride had softened enough. But the time was never right. The pride didn't soften, it calcified into something denser, the kind of silence that eventually becomes its own answer.
By the time Eleanor made a genuine effort to find her daughter, Sandra had built a life so quietly and so entirely outside of Eleanor's reach that there was nothing to find. She hadn't known about the marriage, hadn't known about the divorce, the illness, what the illness had taken. She had not known about Laurel. 8 months ago, Franklin died, a stroke in the study of their Asheville home. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor moved through every corner of a life shared for 40 years. Papers, files, old correspondence, the physical record of everything built and kept and lost. In a box in the back of Franklin's desk, behind old contracts, behind a wedding photograph she held for a long time, she found a letter, handwritten. Sandra's writing, she knew it immediately, even after 30 years. Folded and refolded many times, the creases worn soft, never sealed, never sent. Written during the illness, not addressed to anyone. The kind of letter you write when something needs to be said and there is nowhere left to say it. It spoke of a daughter, with gray-green eyes who loved design and the smell of old buildings with history in their walls. A daughter Sandra could not protect from the grief of losing her and could not stop worrying about even at the very end. Eleanor read that letter 11 times before she set it down. Then she sat in the quiet for a long while. Then she picked up the phone. The kitchen had gone very still. Rain returned softly against the windows. Laurel had not moved, hands around her mug, eyes steady on Eleanor's face. Now she let out a slow breath. "She never told me about you. Not once. She said some doors were best left closed." Eleanor didn't look away. "She was right to say that. I gave her every reason to close that door and no reason to open it again. I am not here asking for your forgiveness. I don't have the right. I am here because you are the last living piece of my daughter in this world, and you are sitting here not knowing where you came from. That is something I can change. So I am changing it." A silence stretched between them, the kind that holds a great deal inside it. Eleanor reached into the bag beside her and set a folder on the table. "One more thing. Your mother was the sole heir to the Voss estate, the company, the property in Asheville, all of it. When Sandra died, that inheritance passed directly to you. It has been legally yours for 9 years. The law does not require that I find you for it to belong to you. It already does." Laurel looked at the folder for a long time. "I don't want your money." Something moved behind Eleanor's eyes, deep and old and entirely unguarded. "I know. Sandra didn't want it either." A pause. "You are very much her daughter." The silence that followed held 30 years of unsaid things inside it. "But it is yours regardless. Every decision about what to do with it belongs entirely to you." Eleanor left at 3 o'clock, precisely as she arrived. At the door, she turned back one final time with that expression she had carried all afternoon, composed on the surface and underneath completely open. "I would like to come back, if you'll allow it. Only if you'll allow it." Laurel looked at her. This woman, her grandmother, a word that still sat strangely in her mind, large and too new. "I'll think about it." Honest. Nothing more, nothing less. Eleanor nodded as though it was more than she had allowed herself to hope for. She pulled on her gloves, walked down the porch steps, and the black car reversed slowly down Sycamore Lane and disappeared. Laurel stayed on the porch. The cold settled and she barely felt it. Her mind moved too many directions. The oak tree in the yard completely bare. She watched it without seeing. She heard Caleb's truck before she saw it, the familiar engine cutting at the curb just before 6. His steps on the porch. He took one look at her face and sat down in the other chair without asking a single question. That was one of the things about him she had come to understand without ever needing to name it. He knew the difference between silence that wanted to be broken and silence that told him everything when she was ready. Eleanor's arrival, Sandra and the ultimatum, the decades of silence, the unsent letter found in the back of a drawer, the folder on the table, all of it, plainly, without performance. He listened all the way through. When she finished, he sat with it a moment, not rushing, not filling the space. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "What do you want to do? Not what makes sense, not what you should do. What do you want?" She looked at him, this man who had found her in a parking lot in the rain and had never once, in all the months since, made her feel that was something she owed him for. "I want to meet her again. Not like today, not with a folder on the table and 30 years of things unsaid all trying to happen at once. Properly. I want to hear about my mother when she was young. Eleanor knew her then. I barely knew her as a grown woman." She paused. "I don't have many people left who knew her." "Then you already know what you want to do."
They sat on the cold porch a while longer, side by side in the easy, unhurried quiet that had grown between them over 4 months without either of them ever having to arrange it. The kind of quiet that only exists between people who have stopped needing to perform anything for each other. Eleanor came back the following Saturday, without the folder, without the leather gloves, without the armored precision she had carried on Wednesday. She wore something simpler. She knocked a little more softly. She brought one thing. A photograph, slightly worn at the edges, colors gently faded in the way of early 90s prints. A garden somewhere in high summer. A young woman caught mid-laugh, head tilted all the way back, hair loose and wild, one hand half raised as if waving away the camera. The laugh too large, too unguarded, entirely unwilling to be smaller than it was. Laurel's jaw. Laurel's hands. Laurel's exact tilt of the head. Sandra, 26 years old, 1 year out of Asheville, happy in a way that was entirely and defiantly her own. Laurel held it in both hands. The kitchen was quiet. Loretta had ran somewhere. Caleb sat at the table with his coffee, close enough to be present, far enough to give her room. She didn't speak for a time. When she did, her voice was steady. She looks like she's exactly where she wants to be. She was. She always was. Eleanor looked at her carefully and quietly. I know I have no right to ask for anything more than what you've already given me, but I want you to know I am not going anywhere, not unless you tell me to. Laurel was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the photograph one more time, her mother, laughing in a garden, entirely free. Then she set it gently on the table and looked up. Same time next Saturday? Eleanor's composure, that careful, decades-old composure, cracked completely open, just for a moment, just enough. Same time next Saturday. The Saturdays that followed were not easy at first. There were long silences and careful words, and the particular discomfort of two people trying to build something across a very wide gap. But they kept showing up, both of them, and slowly, week by week, the gap began to close. It was on a quiet Sunday afternoon in early spring, 4 months after that first knock on the door, that the moment came. They were at Loretta's kitchen table with cups of tea between them, Eleanor telling a story about Sandra as a little girl, how she used to line up all her stuffed animals and hold court over them like a tiny, very serious judge. Laurel laughed, a real, full laugh, and then looked across the table at this woman who had made so many mistakes. I want you to know something. What happened between you and my mother, I'm not going to carry it as a wall between us. She made her choice, and she was happy. I was loved. That's what she left me. She paused, her voice steady and clear. I forgive you, Eleanor. Not because it didn't matter, but because she would have wanted me to choose the living over the grudge. Eleanor sat very still across the table. Her eyes filled, slowly, quietly, the way deep water rises, and for the first time since Laurel had known her, she made no effort at all to compose herself. She raised you exactly right. Loretta, at the counter with her back turned, reached up and quietly wiped her eye with the corner of her apron. She said nothing. She didn't need to. 3 months later, Eleanor made a request she had clearly been preparing for a long time. She had spent the months since finding Laurel beginning to plan for the future of the Voss Company, and the more she planned, the more one thing became clear to her. The company needed new leadership, someone with vision, with creativity, with the particular quality of seeing spaces and possibilities and bringing them to life. Someone with Sandra's heart and the unbreakable steadiness Laurel had shown standing in the rain. She asked Laurel to consider taking over as CEO. Laurel sat with it for a week. She walked through the Voss estate in Asheville on a clear April morning, the wide rooms, the old architecture, the history built into every wall, and she felt something she recognized, the same feeling she got at her drafting table, the sense of knowing what her hands were for, but now expanded into something larger than she had ever imagined for herself. She called Eleanor that evening. I have one condition. Name it. We do things differently. The company serves people, real people, not just contracts and numbers. My mother left because she felt like a piece of a machine. I won't build that same machine.
A long pause on the line. Your mother would have said exactly that. Is that a yes? That is absolutely a yes.
Laurel, CEO of the Voss Company that summer. She was 23 years old. She moved the house into a restored building in the heart of Asheville, all high ceilings and natural light and wide windows, exactly the kind of space she had always drawn in her sketchbook for made-up families. She built a team that reflected the values she had carried through the worst season of her life: steadiness, presence, the belief that showing up for people was never wasted. The industry noticed. So did Asheville. So did everyone who had known the Voss name as cold and precise. Because under Laurel, it became something warmer, something her mother would have recognized. She drove back to Clover Ridge every weekend. That was the condition she had set for herself, not for anyone else, just for herself. No matter how demanding the week had been, no matter how far the company had stretched her, she drove back on Fridays to the yellow house on Sycamore Lane with the porch light burning. She sat at Loretta's kitchen table. She helped Wren with homework that Wren didn't need help with. She shared the porch with Caleb in the cool evening air, the two of them sitting in the familiar, easy quiet that had become one of the steadiest things in her life. It was on one of those Friday evenings in late October, exactly 1 year after the night they had met, that something shifted between them so naturally and so finally that neither of them could have said precisely when it happened, only that it had. They had been sitting on the porch after dinner, the October air cold enough now that their breath showed faintly in the light. Wren had gone to bed. Loretta had gone in. It was just the two of them in the quiet street, and the dogwood that had long since shed its spring blossoms and stood bare and patient now, waiting for another.
Looked at her for a long moment. I need to tell you something.
Okay.
That night in the parking lot, I've thought about it 1,000 times. What would have happened if I hadn't gone back for eggs? If I'd just gone home? He paused. And every time I think about it, I'm just grateful that I forgot, that I turned around, that you were sitting there in that red dress refusing to fall apart. Laurel was quiet. The porch light fell warm between them. Down the street, someone's front door opened and closed, a brief rectangle of yellow light, and then dark again. I used to think that night was the worst thing that ever happened to me. She took at him fully. Now, I think it might have been the best. He reached over, slowly, without hesitation, and took her hand. She looked down at it, then back up at him. And in her gray-green eyes, those exhausted river water he had first seen staring at wet pavement in the rain, there was something luminous, something settled and certain and entirely new. She leaned her head gently against his shoulder. Neither of them said anything else for a long time. They didn't need to.
It was Wren who said it first, the way children always do, plainly over breakfast the next morning without from her cereal. "Are you and Laurel going to get married, Dad?" Caleb choked on his coffee. Loretta at the stove kept stirring and said absolutely nothing, but her shoulders shook slightly. Laurel looked at the table. A smile spread across her face, slow and warm and entirely unable to be stopped. "Wren, I'm just asking, because if she's going to be here forever, she should probably have her own drawer. She's been using mine." Laurel looked up then, straight at Caleb, and they both laughed. The full, warm, unhurried kind. The kind that belongs to people who have walked through something hard together and come out the other side still standing, still choosing each other, still laughing in a yellow kitchen on a Saturday morning with a little girl who has always been right about everything. Some stories don't begin with luck or careful planning. Some begin with a man who turned his truck around after a 10-hour shift because his daughter wanted scrambled eggs. A young woman who put on a red dress on the worst night of her life because she refused, quietly, stubbornly, completely, to look the way she felt. A grandmother who drove across a state with a photograph and a 30-year apology. And a rain in Clover Ridge, Tennessee, that put the right people in the same place at exactly the right moment. Wren still has the star blanket. She shares it now with Laurel on the cold nights, without being asked. And the porch light at Loretta's house on Sycamore